If you can, hit me with where is Tiffany Dover? I'd appreciate it. Yeah, while I wait for chat to catch up, it's been, yesterday was a stressful day. Let's see, where's Tiffany Dover? There we are. Where is Tiffany Dover? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And for those of you who are new, who don't know, well, Tiffany Dover is a, Google her. Google her. She's somebody that you want to know where she is. Yeah, because nobody's seen hair or hide of her since December of 2020. And the times that people have claimed to have seen her just seem kind of dodgy. Okay, so look into that. It's something to pay attention to. But as many of you know, I'm here in Kharkov, Ukraine, during the special operation that the Russians are carrying out. I was caught originally in Kiev on the 24th of February, and I was there for a few days, about a week, and then I took a train here to Kharkov, and I've been here since the 1st of March. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's been quite the experience. We are currently experiencing a siege. And yesterday I went out, I did a long sojourn around the city. I walked for about over 4 hours, and I just explored everything. And yeah, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of shelling going on. You can hear it, and it's getting closer. I'm near the center of the city, and yeah, it's been stressful. By the way, before I get going, I just want to tell my Patreon supporters that I've been extremely remiss insofar as content creation, because this period has been, as you can imagine, very stressful and very, the stress of constant shelling, to tell you the truth, has made it very difficult to concentrate. And that's why I'm live streaming instead of doing videos, because to tell you the truth, the pressure of having a live audience allows me to focus, or helps me to focus. But if I just start talking into a camera and just record, I just go off in these random tangents. And I'm sure I'm going to go off on random tangents now, okay? So you're going to have to forgive me. And to go back to the Patreon subscribers, I owe you content, and I will be making it up to you. And you guys know that I'm good for it. I've had my Patreon channel since October of 2018. Well, I had since before, but it was October of 2018 that I started producing material there regularly. I do a video every week and a live stream every Sunday, my weekly webinar. And so far I have close to 200 original videos that you'll find nowhere else. And I have over 100 of these weekly webinars there. They're usually between 2 and 3 hours long, sometimes longer, discussing various topics. And whenever I'm late, or I've gotten sick, or something has happened that I've not been able to do material, I've always made it up. And this will be no exception. It'll just take a little bit longer to make it up, because this experience, it's mentally very draining. I'm not going to lie. And yesterday when I went out, because I go out, just about every day, I just take a walk to stretch my legs, clear my head, because you need to go outside. The weather here in Kharkov has been beautiful this past week, just lovely, and the kind of weather that I really like, relatively clear skies, or really clear skies, and cold. I love that. It's like -1 degree Celsius and sunny, clear day. Oh, I love these days. And it's been like that. And so I usually take a walk. I'll walk 2-3 times a day, just to stretch my legs. Sometimes on these walks, I'll go to the supermarket to buy food. The supermarkets are getting emptier and emptier every day. Because there's no resupply, of course. The only thing that gets resupplied is bread. And I think milk, but I don't really like drinking milk. And bread, I was trying to lay off it, but I've been eating. And the problem that's been going on is that sometimes I'll buy like a lot of groceries, figuring that it'll last me several days. And because of anxiety, I wind up eating all of it in like a day or two. And so my weight is kind of yo-yoing. and generally I'm just not in particularly good shape. I'm not going to lie. I mean, it's been draining, because it's the tension of in two directions. Number one, well, the tension really isn't so much. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it's not so much the Russian shelling. You get used to that, especially because you hear the shelling and you can say, "Oh yeah, that's far away. I don't have to worry about that." And so you hear distant shelling, and you're like, "Oh, it's fine. It's not going to hit you. It's 2 kilometers away. Yeah, it sounds loud, but it's 2, 3, 4 kilometers away or farther. And so you're unconcerned. That is not my concern. My concern, quite frankly, is the Ukrainian security forces. That's what has me on edge. Because when I started when I started doing content from Kiev, right when the war started, some of my material went viral. And what happened was that some of the things I said early on, which have proven to be true, well, a lot of people didn't like them. Okay, I said that the Russians were going to tiptoe into Ukraine, that the way that they were going to carry out this war or this special operation, call it what you will, invasion, whatever. The way they were going to carry it out was they were going to try to capture Ukraine, capture it in one piece. They didn't want to break it. They want to capture it. And I also said that they wanted to capture the army, the armed forces. They don't want to destroy the army. Of course not. Because you see, the Russians are a lot smarter than the Americans. They understand that when you destroy a country, you destroy the reason to go and get it. And when you destroy the army, you create the conditions of future chaos. And so the Russians, they're a practical people. They're a pragmatic people. And they understood that the whole point of going into Ukraine was to achieve a political objective. And the political objective was, as they've said, turn Ukraine into a demilitarized neutral area and to denazify. Now, a lot of people in the West have said that this quote-unquote denazification is just a smokescreen and it's baloney and nonsense. Because in the West, we're used to people throwing around the term Nazi all the time, and it's just a way to politically disqualify somebody. Like, for instance, you got J.K. Rowling, and she's not 100% on the whole trans rights thing, and she thinks that it's detrimental to women, which I happen to agree with. And people say, "Oh, she's a Nazi. She's transphobic. She's a Nazi." This is just stupid. She's not that, not at all. And we all know that, okay? And we listen to them, we just put up with this nonsense, right? But in Russia, when they call somebody a National Socialist, they're not fooling around. They mean it, okay? And the rationale of going into Ukraine to quote-unquote denazify, as Putin has said, and the other dignitaries at the Kremlin have said, they're not kidding, and it's for real, because it's real, it's true. Okay? And people in the West don't seem to realize this, or they deny it. Now, the issue of denial is understandable because, unfortunately, in the West, especially in the United States, we have lost the ability to think critically as a people. And instead of thinking critically and thinking with nuance, we think in very stupid, white hats, black hats. Good guys, bad guys. Instead of realizing that sometimes both sides are not particularly good, but one side is less bad than the other. Okay? Now, the fact is that it's not that I am sympathetic to Putin or a Putin apologist. It's not that I'm sympathetic or an apologist for Russia as a country. No, I just understand what their motivation is, and I tried to explain that. And because of that, the SBU, which is the Ukrainian Secret Police, they seem to have taken an interest in me. And on one occasion, some people who were identified to me as banderistas, which means basically fascists, real fascists, like thug fascist, neo-Nazi, kind of like American History X kind of neo-Nazi thug fascist. They came looking for me in my home. And I was told this with no uncertain terms by somebody who knew who they were. And even though this individual didn't speak any English, and I don't speak any Russian or Ukrainian, she made it clear. And she used that word, banderistas, and I knew what was what. And I slipped away. It was just blind luck that I was outside smoking a cigarette. I slipped away to an apartment nearby, and I've been sort of like hopscotching around. Mm. And a time or two, I think I might have been either paranoid or I got lucky again. I don't know. But, there's that old saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that they're not after you. Yeah. So anyway, that part of this whole situation has been grinding. Mhm. It's not the fact that there's Russian shelling going on. It's the fact that I feel I don't understand the languages, and so I'm never sure what people are talking about when I hear them. Because I mean, sometimes I hear some guy yelling into the phone, and maybe he's yelling, I can't find this Gonzalo Lira guy. We gotta find him so I can kill him. Or it could be, honey, I did turn off the stove, and I did turn off the coffee maker. Chill out. I mean, I have no idea what they're talking about. Okay, and the stress is the ignorance, because a lot of times you hear things and just by the words, a few words here and there, you understand the gist of the conversation. You realize, oh, it's not about me. But if you don't understand the language, you're hyper alert. And so because of my early appearances online, where I said that, I said several things. I said in videos, I said, number one, handing out weapons to the citizenry was stupid, which is what the Zelensky regime did on like the second day, handing out AK-47s to everybody. And what happened? I said in videos, I said those weapons were going to be used by criminals and by people looking to settle scores. And criminals were going to buy those weapons because people prefer, money over some weapon that they don't even know how to handle. And so they would sell them, and it was going to be a disaster, and that criminals would get these weapons. And lo and behold, that's happened. Shit, man. DW, I forget what it's called, dw.de, the German news outlet, it admitted it today. I mean, exactly what I predicted, on February 25th or 26th or whatever when I did that video. Mhm. There's even a video I did that's on my Telegram channel where I posted, I was recording myself to post on camera, and all of a sudden, there are shots in the air, within 500 meters of my position at the time on the Krishatik, and 500 meters of me. But of course, the Russians were about 30 to 40 kilometers away. So it wasn't the Russians. It was people with these AK-47s or AK-74s, to be precise about it, settling scores. And I predicted that. And I predicted that the Russians, how they would come in, they would leave civilian infrastructure more or less alone, and they would go after the Ukraine army, which is what they did. And well, many of these comments just went down very, very badly. And also something that I discovered. See, I've been living here for, I don't know, since 2016. And living here off and on because of business and work. Sometimes I spend a lot of time in London, and sometimes I spend a lot of time in Amsterdam. And what happened was that, see, I decided consciously that I would not involve myself in local politics because, I'm a guest in Ukraine, and I didn't want to stick my nose into something that I don't quite understand. I mean, it would be just rude, and that was my thinking. And so I never really paid attention to the leadership. But during the run-up to this crisis, I started paying more attention to the Zelensky regime, to Zelensky himself and to the people around him, and I came to the conclusion that they were just very, very bad actors. Mhm. And this has proven to be the case, okay? And I'm going to discuss specifically one city in this broadcast, and that city is Mariupol, which is on the coast of the Black Sea, on the Sea of Azov. Mhm. The Sea of Azov is this, it's this bit of the Black Sea to the east of Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula. And near Mariupol is Yalta, where the famous conference took place between the great powers of World War II, and how they would divvy up Europe after the war and so forth. And Mariupol is industrial city, a very beautiful city from pictures I've seen, but now it's of course wrecked. Because what happened was that, see, Mariupol is a predominantly ethnic Russian city. Russian and also with a smattering of Greek, interestingly enough, and the Greeks actually play a role in this, and I'll explain in just a moment. Now, what happened in Mariupol is that the group in charge of it was the Azov Battalion. And the Azov Battalion are these neo-Nazis, simple as that. They are neo-Nazi thugs who were originally organized in the early 2010s, and they played a pivotal role in the 2014 Maidan revolution, quote unquote, which was really a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat that was directed by Washington figures, specifically Victoria Nuland, currently the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. And the Maidan coup, because that's what it was, overthrew the legitimately elected government and installed a more Western-friendly government. And the people in charge in Ukraine, they were replaced by this pro-Western crowd. And the Azov Battalion, and other groups like them, there was the Aidan Battalion and the Donbass Battalion and the S14 or C14, the right sector. I mean, there are a whole bunch of different groups, and they're all basically neo-Nazis, banderistas, okay? They're thugs. They are ethnically Ukrainian, fervently anti-Russian, for long-standing reasons that aren't relevant to this conversation. But the basic problem is that Ukraine is a divided country between ethnic Ukrainians and ethnic Russians, and smattering of Poles and Hungarians, but that's more to the west. Here in eastern Ukraine, it's mostly Russian, ethnic Russians. And so what happened was that these we'll just call them Azov Battalion as a shorthand for all of these neo-Nazi, hyper-nationalistic Ukrainian chauvinists, if you want to call it that, okay? And not that there's anything wrong with Ukrainian nationalism. On the contrary, it's perfectly fine to love your country and love your culture. It's perfectly fine. I'm Chilean and I love my culture. I love my country. Of course I do. But the problem with these particular nationalists is that they are violent, and they believe that using violence and intimidation are appropriate means of showing their nationalism and pushing aside any group that they don't particularly like, specifically Russians, ethnic Russians. So anyway, the Azov Battalion, you see, in 2014, a lot of the ethnic Russian areas of the country, specifically in the Donbass region, well, they were, there's a little thing there, they were, they tried to break away from the Maidan, plotters, if you will. And they wanted to either join Russia or just break away from Ukraine. And what happened was that they set up these breakaway republics of Lugansk and Donetsk. Now, the thing is, see, these republics did not quite encompass the area of the oblast of Lugansk and Donetsk. Oblast is basically like the state or region, okay? And it was just partially that. Now, Mariupol is in the Donetsk Oblast, but it is not quite within the sector of the breakaway republic. And they tried to break away, but they failed because they were repressed by the Ukrainian regime. And the Ukrainian regime used these Azov Battalion people, these paramilitary groups, to impose control over Mariupol. Now, over the next 8 years, from 2014 to 2022, there were these constant low-level skirmishes on the so-called contact line. Wait, I don't know if it's Russian shelling or somebody trying to break down my door. Hang on. Sorry about that. It was just shelling. No big deal. Shit, I lost my train of thought. Right. So the Azov Battalion They, right, the Ukrainian regime of Poroshenko, the president who took over from Yanukovych in 2014, well, the Poroshenko regime, they tried to reestablish control over the breakaway republics. And these breakaway republics, they fought against the Ukrainian regime of Poroshenko. And so what was created was the so-called contact line. The contact line, which was with a line separating the breakaway republics from the rest of Ukraine. And the breakaway republics tried to organize a reasonable government or a facsimile of a government. And they're very small regions, and they tried their best. But of course, the Ukrainian regime tried to retake these breakaway republics, and so there was this constant low-level skirmishes. Now, the tragedy is that this resulted in the deaths over the years of 16,000 people, which is a tragedy. It's horrible, because there was this constant shelling and constant, low-level warfare. It wasn't just the soldiers dying; it was also civilians. The shells from both sides really being lobbed back and forth. But you see, only one side had actual civilians, which were the breakaway republics. And so a lot of the civilians there, who tended to be poorer because they didn't have the means to leave. The people who were more well off and more educated were able to leave the breakaway republics for other parts of Ukraine or to the Western European countries altogether. But the people who remained were more poor. And so it was a very difficult life for them. Of course it was. And a lot of innocent civilians died in this constant back and forth. But that was like low level. Never a boil, never a war, just a low level kind of skirmishing. Now, Mariupol was not a part of these breakaway republics, but it was put under the control of the Azov Battalion. In this case, the actual Azov Battalion, okay? Now, what happened was that the Azov Battalion, there were rumors for years that the Azov Battalion was doing all kinds of things. Like, there were stories that, they were like grabbing some poor girl and raping her in the middle of the park or some stuff like that. So, stories that you're like, oh, come on, man. I mean, these stories, they're horrible, sure, but, propaganda. Like, I remember like in 91, when in the run-up to the first Gulf War, I remember there was this pretty Kuwaiti girl who went in front of the U.S. Congress and tears in her eyes talking about how the forces of Saddam Hussein had gone into this hospital where she worked as a nurse and had unplugged all the neonatal units, and all the tiny little babies had died, screaming and suffocating and gasping for air. It was all, and the Saddam Hussein soldiers had laughed and mocked the dying babies, and sounded horrible until you found out later that the chick was like some princess and she never worked a day in her life, and it was all just a big bullshit story. The reason that she'd been put up there was that she spoke perfect English and she was really cute, and that's why she would have been this propaganda mouthpiece. But you get older, wiser, and you realize, oh, it sounds like propaganda. It sounds like a bunch of bullshit, right? And so, when I heard stories about Mariupol and how the Azov Battalion was, doing all sorts of nasty stuff to the civilians there, I was like, oh, come on. Yeah, bullshit. I don't believe it, because it sounded too propagandistic to be true. And so anyway, this war happened, right? And the war happened, and like I said, I hadn't really paid attention to the Zelensky regime. And insofar as the foreign policy is concerned and the situation with Russia, I thought that the Zelensky regime had needlessly provoked the Russians. I also thought that the Americans and the Europeans had led the Zelensky regime down the garden path. The garden path, for those of you who don't know, it's when you sort of like egg on somebody to do something potentially very foolish, and you sort of like fool them into thinking that you're right behind them. And so they walk down this garden path, but they're all alone. And then they get there, and all of a sudden they have to deal with the disaster all on their own. And you who egged them on, you're way back there. You're not there at all. And so I thought that, the Zelensky regime was led down the garden path, and now, the whole Russia situation, right? But then I started actually paying more attention to the Zelensky regime. And I started hearing stories that really freaked me out. And the stories I started hearing were of political assassinations. And the one that stayed with me the most was the assassination of a man named Volodymyr Struk, S-T-R-U-K. And he was a mayor of a small town called Limina of 18,600 people. And he was kidnapped by far-right national extremists, Ukrainians, of course. And he was the mayor of this small town in Ukraine. And he had been pro-Russian, or not even pro-Russian per se, or certainly not anti-Ukraine, but just more sympathetic to the Russian side. And, you know, you see pictures of him. This article that I'm telling you appeared in the Daily Mail. I mean, you can look it up. Mayor Struk assassinated Ukraine. Those 4 words in Google search, and it'll take you right to the Daily Mail article. Because, as I just said, with those keywords, see, this poor bastard, early on in the war, he was kidnapped. He was kidnapped, and a couple of days later, kidnapped right from his home. They came to his home, they kidnapped him in front of his wife and family, took him away, and 2 days later, dumped his body, shot through the heart, just the one time, right through the heart, dumped his body in the center of the city, of his own town. And what the fuck you think that was? I was trying to send a message. And that was the point where I started thinking, whoa, 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 what's going on here? And I started reading into it, looking into it. I mean, like really digging down and not buying any of the bullshit of the mainstream media. And I saw a video of an MMA fighter whose name slips my mind, but you can see that video. It's floating around on Telegram especially. Telegram is the place to go for information because there's no way to censor it. Okay, so you can get a lot of unfiltered information from there. And this MMA fighter, some Ukrainian champion, who one time had sparred with like some Chechen guys or something like that, you know, and he sparred and said some phrase, you know, praising the leader of the Chechens, you know, perfectly innocuous, the kind of thing that you do out of politeness, you know. And because of this, they tortured the guy and beat the ever-living fuck out of him. Yeah, MMA fighter he might have been, but, you know, 2-3 guys holding you down, I don't care how tough you are. You could be Mike Tyson in his prime, and they're still going to beat the shit out of you, and they beat the shit out of this guy. And I don't even know what the fuck happened to the poor bastard. And then I saw another picture of a member of Ukraine's parliament kidnapped. And one of the kidnappers, like a fucking big fucking goon, you know, the typical, you know, big fat fucking goon with a big beard, right? And he's holding the guy like this, and in his hand, you know, I mean, the only thing I got similar is a cigarette, you know. In his hand, he's got a knife, like holding the knife right to his throat, you know. And the poor parliamentarian man is looking like, how the fuck you think he's looking? He's looking scared shitless. And this guy, they blindfolded him and they handed him over to the SBU. The SBU is the State Security Services. SBU are the initials in Ukrainian. And they're basically the KGB, okay? And there's a video of the guy, of this member of parliament, being verbally abused and manhandled by an SBU officer. And this is real shit, right? And I saw it, and it wasn't fucking around. No, this is for real. And as this war has progressed, this conflict, we're seeing more and more videos of these neo-Nazi goons abusing others for perceived disloyalty. And it's increasing, okay? And actually, the reason it's increasing is very obvious, see? Because the Russians are winning. The Russians are decisively winning. And in the West, they've pretended otherwise for quite a while, all kinds of bullshit and mental gymnastics. But slowly, you're starting to realize the more serious mainstream media is kind of like slowly admitting that, yeah, like the Russians are winning, because they are. And I'm not going to go into the whole strategy of what the Russians are doing, but bottom line, what they've done is that they've isolated the different parts of the Ukrainian army into pockets that are surrounded. The biggest pocket is around Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, and that's basically 60,000 soldiers. Hang on just a second. Sorry about that. And so the various pockets, one is around the town of Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine. That's the main bulk of the Ukrainian army. It's the bulk of fighters. There are roughly 60,000 men there. No, estimates vary, and they're broken up into several pockets. But basically, these soldiers are isolated and they don't have any gasoline. And so they can't really withdraw, okay? And they're kind of like stuck there and surrounded by the Russians, who are slowly, turning up the heat on them. Then there's Kharkov, and then there's Kiev, and then there's the south, and there's Mariupol. I'm going to discuss Mariupol. Be patient. And see, each of these pockets is surrounded by the Russians, and they're just slowly squeezing, right? Okay. So, like I've been hearing, like on the mainstream media, the Russian, the mainstream media saying, the Western mainstream media saying that the Russians are destroying civilian infrastructure and stuff like that. And I remember on the first day of the invasion, the lights are still on. I'm like, the Russians have no intention of destroying the infrastructure, the civilian infrastructure, because the lights are still on. And yeah, I mean, here I am in Kharkov, in the center of Kharkov, and we've gone, 25 days, and the lights are still on. As you can see, the artificial light, right? And the heat, which is the most important, the heat is still on. Cell phone is still working. And so what does this tell you? Well, the Russians don't mean to destroy the civilian infrastructure, because if they wanted to, they could have destroyed it on the first day. No problem, okay? The civilian infrastructure is extremely fragile. It's not designed for withstanding a military attack. The Russians destroyed Ukrainian armed forces communication facilities, command and control stuff on the very first hour of fighting, okay? Just blew it to kingdom come. But the civilian infrastructure, well, totally ignored it. No interest whatsoever in hurting it. Well, what does that tell you? Okay, so anyway. I don't know how I got into that particular topic, but oh yeah, the Western media. The Western media said all kinds of lies. And one of the lies they kept saying was that the Russians were shooting up the humanitarian corridors. And that didn't make sense to me, because the Russians are the ones who want the humanitarian corridors. I've said this before, and I'll repeat it, and those of you who've heard it before, well, sorry, you're just going to have to be patient. But you see, the rationale for the humanitarian corridors is very simple. The Russians want to open as many as possible so as to drain away sectors of civilians, but create the conditions where soldiers who are not fully committed to the cause can desert. Because you see, there are three ways to stop an opposing military force. You can kill the soldier, you can have the soldier surrender, or you can have the soldier desert. As a practical matter, any one of those three outcomes is the same. It's a soldier who's not fighting anymore, an opponent, a soldier of the opposing army who's not fighting anymore. If he's dead, if he's captured, or if he deserts, he's not fighting, right? And so how do you encourage desertion? By creating corridors, humanitarian corridors, that you guarantee are going to be safe. And why do you want to guarantee it? Because you see, on the first day of a humanitarian corridor, one private goes down it. He takes off his uniform, puts down his weapon, puts on civilian clothes, and sneaks out with the other civilians. And what happens the next day? The next day, his squad or platoon or whatever, they look around and see he's gone. And they say, he must have gone down the corridor, because he probably talks to his mates, right? And so the next day, what happens? More soldiers desert, because they know that the Russians aren't shooting at anybody in these humanitarian corridors, right? And that's the whole rationale. The Russians perfected this tactic in Syria, and it's a fantastic tactic because it accomplishes the goal. Like I said before, the Russians are very pragmatic. And between, fighting against somebody or encouraging them to desert, to lay down their weapons and just slip away, which do you prefer? I personally prefer to encourage somebody to slip away, because it's less effort for me. I mean, forget about the morality and humanity of the issue. If I encourage my opponent to desert, I don't expend any effort. I don't even expend a bullet, right? The guy just slipped away, and that's that. And one less soldier that I have to fight against. which is a good thing. You see how pragmatic the Russians are? That's why they guarantee the security of these humanitarian corridors. But there were all these reports that the Russians were shooting up the humanitarian corridors. And there were all these reports that in the negotiations, because the Russians, unlike in the West, the Russians believe in continuing to negotiate with your opponent even as you are at war with him. And in the negotiations, the Ukrainians constantly kept putting up roadblocks and saying that they didn't want this kind of humanitarian and that kind of, and all kinds of excuses. Because of course the Ukrainians were wise to this thing that the Russians are doing. And so they didn't want to create the conditions where their army would start to melt away. That's why they would block humanitarian corridors in the negotiations. And this is why it was the Ukrainians who were shooting up the humanitarian corridors. And this is a fact. And at first I didn't know who to believe. It didn't seem logical to me to think that the Russians were shooting up humanitarian corridors. But I didn't have any proof. And it's impossible to prove a negative. But what happened with Mariupol, what's emerged, a lot of testimony. And a lot of testimony from people who have no reason to lie. And that's a key issue. Because see, a lot of times people lie in order to please the people who have power over them. And think about it. I'm a prison guard and I have you as my prisoner. And so I tell you, I'm a handsome guy, aren't I? And what the hell are you going to say? You're going to say, yeah, Gonzalo, you're the handsomest guy I've ever known. Yeah, you're so handsome. You're blindingly handsome. Of course you're going to say that. If I have power over you, you're going to say anything to keep me happy, or at least keep me off your back, right? But what happens if, I have no power over you? You're going to say the truth, of course. So what's come out of Mariupol, okay, the stories come out of it, and there's so many testimonials that it's not fake, it's real. The stories coming out of Mariupol is that the Azov battalion and members of the Ukrainian armed forces have been deliberately shooting up the humanitarian corridors and have been deliberately blocking them and have essentially been using civilians as human shields. And a lot of the stories that were blamed on the Russians, well, it's basically what the Azov battalion and Zelensky thugs were doing to the Ukrainian civilians, and then blaming it on the Russians, as if the Russians had done what they themselves were doing. Now, I had a very interesting conversation with somebody today, a text message conversation, and I've reread it several times to be absolutely sure that I get all the details right. Now, this acquaintance of mine, I've known her for several months, long before this whole situation. And her occupation is totally irrelevant insofar as war or any government or anything of the sort. I just want to put that out there. And it's obvious, okay? I mean, if you meet somebody, months before some war, obviously the war doesn't affect the relationship at all. There are lots of people I've met during this period, but those relationships are because of the war, and you don't know where they're coming from. But this person, I met her several months ago, so I know that she's on the up and up. And she is from Mariupol, and her parents live there, and her aunt and uncle live there. And she was caught outside of the country when this whole thing went down, okay? And she told me, ecstatic today, that she'd been able to talk to her family and that they were on their way to Rostov in Russia. She didn't tell me how they were going there. Okay, only that they were going and that they were safe, and she had spoken to them, and that she was just ecstatic, over the moon, because she hadn't heard from them pretty much since this whole thing started. And she started telling me what her parents and aunt and uncle had gone through. Okay. Now, apparently they had been shot at by Azov battalion people, because on more than one occasion, they had tried to leave the city and they'd been prevented by the Azov battalion in control of Mariupol. And she also said that one of the big problems that her parents and aunt and uncle had was that there was no food and no effort at all to distribute food. And in fact, the little food that was available was delivered to the Azov battalion and to those civilians considered friendly, or at least Ukrainian, in Mariupol. Okay? So basically, kind of like an ethnic cleansing kind of thing by way of food. Mhm. And she told me that the Azov battalion had used civilians as human shields, and that a lot of things I'd been hearing about were not Russian propaganda. They were real. Hmm? I mean, she didn't tell me that. That's the inference I drew, because she was telling me the details of what had happened to her parents and aunt and uncle. Okay? And she explained that one of the things that they were most relieved was when the Russians finally took control of their neighborhood, because that's what happened. They were in their homes and they couldn't leave, and the Azov battalion positioned weapons, mortars and whatnot, and their own soldiers among the people, so that if the Russians attacked, they would hit the civilians. See? The civilians were being used as literal human shields by the Azov battalion. And what happened was that this friend's parents said that one day it was like there were no more Azov, there was nobody around. And they started coming out of their houses as if, like waking up out of a dream. And all of a sudden, the Russians came over and took over. Okay? And the Russians started feeding everybody. And that was the thing that struck them the most. They were so hungry that they hadn't had food for quite a while. She didn't actually tell me how many days. I should have asked that. It didn't occur to me, to tell the truth. But anyway, the point is that, see, this person, you are going to have to take my word for it, because I'm telling you this story, but I have no reason to lie. I am Chilean. I don't have any problem in stepping on people's toes and speaking the truth as I see it. And I try to be as objective as possible. Insofar as Russia and Ukraine, I don't have any horse in this race. I'm Chilean. And though I've lived in Ukraine, and Ukraine is lovely, I don't feel that, I'm Ukrainian and Ukrainian to the death. Frankly, it's a problem of my upbringing. I don't feel particularly of any country or place. I kind of like drift along through life, right? Citizen of the world, if you want to be all sophisticated. But I don't think it's as glamorous as that, but that's not the point of this conversation. The point is, see, I don't have any reason to lie about this stuff. I don't get any benefit. And a lot of people who have criticized me say that I must be paid by somebody. I'm not paid by anybody. The only people who pay me are my Patreon subscribers. That's why I issued that apology at the beginning, because I feel very bad about it, because I feel I have an obligation to my Patreon supporters, and I've been a bit remiss because of present circumstances. But and I also get ad revenue from doing these videos and super chats. And I'm a dickhead and I don't read the super chats. But I'm going to do like a dedicated show of answering the super chats, because they've been very, very generous, and it would be remiss of me not to do it. But anyway, and the point I don't do super chats during the show is that I don't want to lose my train of thought, and that's why I don't even pay attention to the chat, quite frankly. You guys could be saying God knows what, and I have no idea. I'm just trying to keep my thoughts flowing here. But anyway, I don't have anything to gain by saying anything. And if the Russians were abusing civilians, I'd say so. Yeah, because why wouldn't I? I mean, frankly, it would be easier for me because I'm in Ukraine. And if I started saying that, oh yeah, the Russians are abusing civilians and they're fucking evil and we should kill them all, and resist, well, I'd be really popular in Ukraine now, wouldn't I? People would think I'm just the greatest thing, Oh, look at this little South American guy. He's on our side and he's, spitting on those Russians, poo, 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 But that's not the truth, see? I got to call him like I see him. And I realized early on, when Zelensky started handing out weapons to civilians, that he was irresponsible. He was a fucking idiot. I thought he was a fucking idiot before, with the whole handling of Russia and basically goading Russia into this invasion. Then I thought he was a bigger fucking asshole and just totally irresponsible for handing out weapons. And then as I started getting educated, as they say, I started realizing that the Zelensky regime is full of thugs and murderers and kidnappers and thieves and just the lowest scum of the earth. As simple as that. And the SBU is full of those fucking scum. And that's the truth. And I'll tell you quite honestly that I'm scared shitless most of the time because I figure that, I'm going to get the knock at the door at any moment. I'm scared. Mhm. And like yesterday, when I went around the city, I went around, like I said, like around 4 hours. And I went downtown. Like to the historic center of the city to see everything going on. I saw a lot of different stuff, and I'm setting up like a live stream to discuss what I saw with a military expert, so he can explain what I saw because I saw things that seemed incongruous, and I need somebody to put what I saw in context and tell me, oh yeah, that's normal. No, it's not weird at all. And that other thing you saw, that's weird. Try to figure out, make heads or tails of my experience because I realized as I was walking around the city and I would see destruction in some places and other places would be perfectly intact. I realized I don't have the experience to be able to make an intelligent analysis of what I'm seeing, but at least I can remember it, and later take notes, of course, because I didn't dare whip out my camera and film anything because there were practically nobody around. I mean, nobody. It was just like empty, right? Maybe some random pedestrians here and there. And the pedestrians were all like nervous about the other pedestrians. And that's something that struck me that I found profoundly weird. Because, see, in 2010, I was living in Chile, and there was the great earthquake of that year. And it was an 8.8. It was the epicenter was in Concepcion. And in Santiago, it was felt as an 8.6, which was remarkable because the distance between Concepcion and Santiago was pretty big. And it caught me on the 15th floor because I had an apartment on the 15th floor. It was a penthouse apartment. And when it happened, when it hit, my apartment was moving around, man. It must have been at least 2, 3 meters off the axis, on each direction. It was unbelievable. It was the scariest time of my life. Well, very exhilarating though. It was kind of cool. But right after the earthquake, I went downstairs and I went over to my mother's to see how she was doing. I took my dog with me, and the two of us, me and my dog, went over there. It was like about a mile away. And as we're going, we stumble across different people. I remember there was this one in this parking lot there. There was this car with a woman in it, a young woman, and she was with the radio on and kind of loud, and everything. The lights were out and everything, and so that's why I couldn't go online or anything to figure out what the hell was going on because as soon as the earthquake hit, the lights all went out. And I was talking to her. I talked to her, I remember, and she was very friendly and very forthcoming with all the information she had. There was a sense of quote unquote community. I really hate using that word, but there really was in this occasion. And then later, when I got to my mother's apartment, everybody in the apartment complex that she lived in was downstairs in the patio. Mhm. And they're all hanging out. It was like 3, 4 in the morning, right? But everybody's like hanging out because they wanted to make sure that the building was structurally sound, and so everybody had slipped downstairs, and it was the end of summer, and so it was like a not warm night, but it was pleasant. And so I remember just being there, and everybody was very relaxed and laughing, and just a lot of the kids were playing with the dog, my dog, because she was adorable, and she loved to play, and so all the kids were like, oh, cute dog, all like good shit, right? But there was that sense of we're all in this together. And I always thought that if I'm in a war zone, I'll have that feeling of like, we're all in this together. But in Kharkov, in the center, there wasn't that feeling at all. It was scary. It was like everybody was paranoid and worried. Now, you're not paranoid and worried unless you have a reason to be so. And I remember I walked around for like 4 hours and I was so fucking scared of the people. And I was going back to my current place. And I'd walked like, at that point, about 3 hours, I guess. God alone knows how many kilometers because I didn't really track it because I was just going everywhere. I was just tracked it in terms of time. And I'd walked about 3 hours, I would guess, perhaps a little more. And I'd only come across two groups of more than two guys or two people. Mhm. Everybody was like on their own. Or a couple of times I came across elderly couples, and clearly elderly. I mean, with like a cane kind of elderly, and that they're harmless to you, but the people who were like military age, you sort of like kept an eye on them, if not from your peripheral vision, right? And you knew that they were doing the same with you. Everybody really scared of one another. Mhm. So anyway, I'm walking back to my place, and oh yeah, I forgot to mention, like I saw a lot of cars. Well, not a lot of cars. They'd be coming by at random, but many of the cars that I saw, they had their license plates taped up, and I don't know why. Mhm. But I remember specifically, I saw a G-Wagon, and I've owned G-Wagons. I know that they're a pretty penny. And the silver one was driving around, and I was like, whoa, what the hell is this G-Wagon doing? And it looked brand new. It looked nice and clean. And that's how I noticed that it had white masking tape over the license plate. Actually, I don't know if it was masking tape or maybe it was plastic taped over. I can't tell you. It was too far away. But the license plates, front and rear, were covered. Because I could tell, because I saw it coming towards me, and I was like, wow, that's a nice G-Wagon, and that's weird, no license plate. And then I watched it pass me, and the rear didn't, had the license plate covered up too. And like there was this one other car I saw. It was a white sedan. I couldn't tell you the make, but like a rounded, anonymous kind of sedan, and it had blue painter's tape over the license plate. It popped. That's why I noticed it. And yeah, there was some of that. And I saw, like one group of like 3, 4 guys, and they were like hanging out, and then they got in their car and drove away. And that was, I mean, as I was approaching them, they drove away. But they weren't scared of me. They didn't pay attention to me, of course. And like after about 3 hours, I'm walking back to my place, and I came around like a corner and sort of like stumbled upon 2 cars and 3 guys, and they had their car stopped there, and they looked like they were waiting for something. And I got really fucking scared, man. And of course, the rule is that when you see something scary, just act normal. Just keep on walking like nothing's going on. Because it's like with dogs. If you see a dog and you don't know the dog, just ignore the dog, and the dog will ignore you. But if you focus on the dog will focus on you. And the more you focus on the dog will focus on you, until finally the dog will start to bark and bite at you, right? Same with people. People are animals. I mean, and I don't mean this in like a derogatory sense. I mean this in a literal sense. Human beings are Homo sapiens sapiens. We are primates. Hairless primates. And we have the ability to talk and, make space shuttles and go to the moon and shit, right? But we're still animals. And we still have that visceral reaction, just like a dog would. And so when I saw these guys, I kind of like ignored them and kept on my way, never deviating from my course and never really looking at them, although on my peripheral vision, I was very aware of them. And there were like 3 guys, and I only really paid attention to the one guy, the biggest guy. He was like a big guy, like 6'3", easy. And like, big, he looked muscled, but, and he had a beard, And so other than that, I couldn't tell you anything about the guy, but he had a weapon on him. I saw it. It was in his waistband. And as I'm passing the car, the angle of the car such was I could see the open passenger door, and there was a rifle of some sort. I could not tell you what kind, but it looked military of some sort, that was on the passenger side. And I just kept on walking, And yeah, I have no idea who they were, what they were doing. Well, they were smoking cigarettes, so I'm assuming that they were just there for a cigarette break, right? But anyway, all of this is going on, and I can hear in the distance the shelling of the Russians. And the shelling never bothered me or worried me. It was the other people. Yeah. Anyway, that's the experience I had in Kharkov, right? But insofar as Mariupol, to go back to it, Well, a lot of people are coming out and they are testifying to the fact that what my friend's parents experienced was commonplace. And there's one video in particular that's going around. I'm going to put it after this broadcast. I'll put it in the description of this broadcast, a link to it. Um, See, I had no idea about this, that in Mariupol, there are a lot of Greek Ukrainians. Because back in the day of Catherine the Great, my friend Alexander Mercouris told me about this over at the Duran. Catherine the Great imported a bunch of Greeks to work on the tobacco plantations of Mariupol. I didn't, no idea that they had tobacco plantations in Mariupol, but there you go. And so this this group of Greeks had just, developed there over the centuries, literally. Okay, and they were ethnically Greek, but they spoke Ukrainian, born in Ukraine. In fact, they spoke Greek with a foreign Ukrainian accent. But anyway, the siege of Mariupol, the Russians have fallen on that city really hard because they want to destroy the Azov battalion, because they said that they want to denazify. And they have made no bones about the fact that they want to really hurt the Nazis, the far-right extremists. They're really serious about it. And the Azov battalion knows it. And so they're fighting to the death at Mariupol. And they've been using civilians, ethnic Russian civilians, as human shields. And my friend confirmed this to me. And there have been so many accounts of other people. And random ladies with kids and telling the story, and you're like, no, this is not a crisis actor, this is like a real person, man. And what was most interesting to me, at any rate, was that, see, these Greeks living in Mariupol, many of them got, after parts of the sector, parts of the city fell to the Russians, and the Russians evacuated people, back to Russia or back wherever they wanted to. Many of these people of Greek descent decided to go to Greece. And the Russians just sent them to Greece, no problem. And in Greece, these people, far from the Russians, in the custody of Greeks in Greece, started telling stories about, the Azov battalion used them as human shields. The Azov battalion would shoot up the humanitarian corridors. And these stories were not propaganda, they were real. Mhm. And you get so many stories that are coming out on videotape, on, like I said, on Telegram. They're real. It's really going on. They're not lying. They're not saying, telling you some story because they're trying to please the Russians who have liberated them, and they're like, okay, well, meet the new boss, same as the old boss kind of thing. No, 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 no. They're telling the truth. And in the West, they are claiming outrageously, and they really are claiming this, the mainstream media, the system pigs of the Western media, are claiming that people in Mariupol are being kidnapped by the Russian soldiers and sent to concentration camps in Russia. And that's a lie. That's a blatant lie. And you see where the Russians are housing these women, these children, their dogs. There's like some video of like it's basically like these big like basketball, volleyball type indoor kind of facilities where they have a bunch of cots and they have all the people there. I mean, like a typical like FEMA installation after a hurricane or some shit like that, right? And the Russian soldiers are, not doing anything to them. I mean, they're feeding them and keeping them warm, right? And of course, yes, there are Russian TV journalists interviewing these people. Of course, because the Russians want to put out their message, I mean, it's understandable, right? They're supposed to be quiet? No, that doesn't bother me. And that they use footage of these people to make posts, trying to butt rest their position, it's understandable. Yeah, and because that's what propaganda is. It's trying to get people to view your side more favorably. I'm in the middle of this situation in the sense of that I have no I have no need to curry favor with the Russians. In fact, I have every incentive to curry favor with the Ukrainian side because I'm still here and I know that goons are kind of like looking for me. And so it would be easier for me to just lie and say that, yes, the Russians are the evil people who have kidnapped all these poor people from Mariupol and whatnot. But that's not true. And the truth of the matter is, and as unpleasant and distasteful as it is to say, is that members of the Ukrainian armed forces have acted despicably, using people, civilians, as human shields. And they have deliberately been putting weapons amid civilian infrastructure. And I can prove this to you extremely easily. Go to ABC News. For those of you who are not American, ABC News stands for the American Broadcasting Company. It's their news division. And they did a piece on Ukrainian armed forces preparing Odessa for the inevitable Russian invasion. And do you know where they were doing this piece? In a school. The Ukrainian armed forces was using a school to assemble its weaponry and its men and the necessary material to do battle with the Russians. Now, of course, any structure where you have a lot of weapons and a lot of men, that's going to become a military target. And so the Russians are going to try to attack that school. They're going to try to destroy that school. Of course they would. Because, I mean, that's the whole point of a war, right? It's one army against the other army. And, you know, you try to beat the other guy. Beat the other guy, either kill him, get him to surrender, or get him to run away. Those are the only three ways that you can defeat an opponent. And so if an opponent puts all his eggs in the basket of a school, puts all his weapons and bunks out his men in a school, and then the Russians attack it, well, what's the point of that? It's to get the PR victory. See? The Russians bombed the school. They're so evil. And if the school is completely destroyed, well, that doesn't matter, you know? And if they put weapons, you know, mortars and whatnot, among civilian housing, and of course the Russians trying to take out that mortar or that howitzer or whatever it is, they start shelling in that direction and they blow up some house because it's inevitable, because they're not going to hit it like the one shot, right? And they wind up killing some innocent civilians, not because the Russians mean to, but the Russians are just trying to take out that howitzer or whatever it is that is hidden among the civilians. See? The Zelensky regime is doing this, and what's coming out of Mariupol proves this. And it's not, I mean, this was something that was very obvious to me because I always live by the motto, cui bono, who benefits? In any situation, there are people who benefit from it, and they benefit directly from it. Now, if you are, you know, the Zelensky regime, and you're trying to convince the West to commit troops and aircraft and weaponry to fight the Russians, well, wouldn't it be great if there was some humanitarian disaster that would emotionally blackmail the West into taking up your fight and committing men and planes and weaponry to fight the Russians? Wouldn't that be great? Sure it would. And so the Zelensky regime is deliberately using its own people, the Ukrainian people, as human shields, deliberately so as to cause a humanitarian crisis, so as to emotionally blackmail the West into joining in the fight. That was pretty obvious to me from the very beginning. But Mariupol and the living testimony of the people there is proving this beyond a shadow of a doubt. And the key people of this whole sordid drama are those Greek Ukrainians who are in Greece right now. Because why would they lie? Why would they make up a story? Two possibilities. Either they are so terrified of the Russians, even though there's the whole Black Sea is between them and where they are in Greece, right? They're so terrified of the Russians that they're lying, or they're telling the truth. Me, I think that they're telling the truth. I mean, it's pretty fucking obvious if you're an adult, right? And so this is what's going on. And this is why Mariupol is so important, because it proves without question what the Zelensky regime is doing. In Kiev today, the biggest shopping center in the city was totally annihilated by the Russians. And, in the West, they're saying, oh, the evil Russians, they did this because they're trying to destroy the civilian infrastructure, which is a lie, because like in Kiev, there's still electricity, there's still cell phones, there's still internet, there's still heat and water and sewage. No, the Russians destroyed that shopping center because that's where the Zelensky regime was assembling weapons and whatnot. That's the truth. The Zelensky regime ordered a squad at the nuclear facility in Zaporozhye, the nuclear power plant. They ordered a squad with an RPG to go there and start firing their rocket-propelled grenade at the Russians from that site so as to draw Russian fire towards the nuclear power station, so as to deliberately create a nuclear accident, or at least get the PR victory that the Russians are attacking a nuclear power station. Oh, those crazy evil Russians. I'm not saying that the Russians are these saints, and I'm not saying that the Russian leadership are saints, but what I am saying is that the Zelensky regime has every incentive to create a humanitarian disaster, to create some sort of nuclear accident or some chemical accident and blame it on the Russians so as to blackmail the West into joining this fight. And the testimony that we're getting in Mariupol proves how evil these people really are. How these people, the Azov battalion, it turns out they really have been raping people in public and getting away with it scot-free and stealing people's possessions, their cars or their food or their money. They've been doing that for 8 years. And the people there were too poor to leave, and so they had to take the abuse. And when they were used as human shields, they couldn't do anything because the Azov battalion had the guns and they didn't. And the Azov battalion, the Zelensky regime thugs, pointed these weapons to the civilians. Now, it gets me a little bit hot under the collar, to tell you the truth. I mean, it really does, right? And I think that it's important that people understand this and understand that the so-called journalists who are all in Lviv, far from the action, or in their, comfy little hotel room in Kiev, I was staying there, nice 5-star hotel, yeah. I got kicked out of it because I started telling the truth about what the fuck was going on in Kiev, and the management didn't like it. Yeah. So anyway, they're staying at their nice comfy hotels in Kiev, or far away from anything in Lviv. Frankly, most of them are far away from anything in Lviv. And they're telling lies, deliberate lies. And the sins that the Zelensky regime is committing, they're ascribing it to the Russians and blaming it on the Russians. And the Russians, I'm not saying that they are saints, but they're not doing this. What the Russians are being accused of is what the Zelensky regime and its thugs, its murderers, its thieves in its employ, they're the ones doing this. And so when you are told, or when somebody tells you how evil the Russians are, you should say, no, it's not that the Russians are evil. It's the Zelensky regime knows how to manipulate you. That's what's going on. Zelensky, in the last few days, has been doing this Zoom tour. He's doing these Zoom speeches. He did it in the US Congress, the German Bundestag, the Canadian Parliament, the Israeli Knesset, the German Parliament too. Yeah, I said that. Oh. Anyway, he's been doing this tour, right? and trying to get the West riled up, trying to get them to join his cause. And if you notice these speeches, he'll say anything, anything at all. And that's actually understandable when you're in a desperate situation. I mean, I actually understand it, because if you're in a desperate situation, yeah, you will wind up saying anything. Some of the people got pissed off. Some of the people got pissed off, like, for instance, to the American Congress, he mentioned Pearl Harbor and brought up Martin Luther King Jr., which is kind of weird. To the Knesset, he compared what was going on to the Holocaust, which is absurd, because nobody, not even the most insane system pig, is actually claiming that the Russians are, exterminating the Ukrainians. It's nonsense. Although, no, wait, let me think here. There have been people I've noticed on Twitter who truly believe that the Russians are sending people from Ukraine to Russian concentration camps, which is just stupid, It's just, what the fuck are these people thinking? But anyway, Zelensky just said a lot of shit out of desperation, and I understand that, actually. But you have to understand the kind of desperation it is. It's not the desperation of the decent man, the decent war leader, trying to save his nation. It's the desperation of a rat trying to save his own skin. A man who was nothing but an actor before 2015, and who by 2019 had been placed as president of Ukraine, bought and paid for by oligarchs who controlled him, with the active assistance of the American Secretary of State in the State Department. A man who today is worth over $1 billion, who's got a $35 million mansion in Miami, another mansion in Italy worth $55 million, or perhaps it's the other way around. The mansion in Italy is 35 and the one in Miami is 55. It doesn't matter, man. It adds up to the same. A whole boatload of goddamn money that he's got. And how did he earn that? He stole it. Don't give me any of this nonsense that he earned it. He wasn't that successful of an actor. He stole it. Because that's what's going on in Ukraine. All kinds of corruption. And this guy, he's holding on to power and using civilians as human shields for his goons, and going around trying to get everybody to fight his wars for him because he's losing, because he's desperate. And that's the terrible thing, the worst part of it all. Because, see, these goons, these lowlifes, these people with no honor or dignity, the Zelensky goons, as they realize that they are losing, as they realize that the Russians are coming for them, and it's going to be a horrible day for them when the Russians get their hands on them, as they lose, they lash out. They lash out at civilians. They shoot civilians. They lash out of fear and impotence. Because that's what men with no honor, no dignity do. When they realize that they are losing, they do not do the honorable thing. And the honorable thing is to stand up and take the hit and say, yes, I have lost and I surrender, or I'm not going to surrender. I'm going to fight to the death. Either outcome is respectable. But the idea of using civilians as human shields, or lashing out at civilians, abusing them despicably because of your impotence, because of your unwillingness to fight to the death and your fear of surrendering, that's unacceptable. And that's what's going on with the Zelensky regime. And I want you all who are listening to me, I mean, frankly, I don't know how many people are listening to me. It might be just one person. One person is fucking enough. You have to tell others what's going on. You have to tell other people, this Zelensky regime is fucking evil. It's not merely incompetent. It's not merely corrupt. It is fucking evil. That's what it is. And when you see evil, you have to stand up and point it out. And it doesn't matter how scared it makes you, because I'm not going to lie, I'm very scared. But it doesn't matter. It's more important. It's more important to live with yourself, to be able to face yourself in the mirror every day, and to stand up and say, this is fucking wrong. Okay, I don't have anything else to say. I'll see you later.